Hi friends, I'm Austin from Animal Quest. Today I'm covering some of the worst snake encounters ever. From a backpacker who crowded a king cobra for a video to a man who went after a black mamba with a garden fork. But first we start in Louisiana, where a woman asked to hold a 16-foot python for a single photo. It was March 18, 2017, and a warm spring evening had settled over a rural property outside Lafayette, Louisiana. A small backyard gathering was winding down, the kind where people drift between the grill and a few coolers as the light drops. The host kept a private reptile collection in a converted shed behind the house, all properly permitted, and its centerpiece was the thing half the guests had really come to see. Sylvain Naquin was a 45-year-old reptile keeper who had kept large constrictors for the better part of 2 decades. He was the guy in his circle people called when they found something scaly in their yard, and he knew his animals inside and out. His biggest was a reticulated python a little over 16 feet long, an animal he had raised from a hatchling and handled almost daily, and one he respected enough to never handle completely alone. Delphine Odette was a 31-year-old veterinary technician and a friend of a friend, there for the evening with a few people from work. She spent her days around animals and was completely at ease with them, maybe a little too at ease, the way people get when nothing has ever gone wrong for them yet. She had been asking Naquin about the big snake since she arrived, and what she really wanted was a photo of herself holding it. Naquin agreed, but he was clear about how it would work. He told her he would stay right next to her the whole time, that she should support the snake's body at several points and never let it anchor itself on her, and the one hard rule, never let it get around her neck. He had given that same speech 100 times to 100 guests, and most of them listened. By that point in the evening, Delphine had had a couple of drinks, and her attention was mostly on framing the shot. The other guests had started drifting inside as the light went down. Naquin turned to a patio table a few steps away to pick up his phone for the photo, still close enough to reach her in a stride, his eyes off the snake for just a moment. She had a guy right next to her whose one rule was never let it near her neck, and the neck is the exact spot she chose for the photo. Every constrictor I have read about kills the same boring way, and people keep handing it the same opening. Reticulated pythons are the longest snakes on Earth, with big females stretching well past 16 feet and weighing over 100 pounds. They are ambush constrictors, and the important thing to understand is that they do not bite to kill. They bite to get a grip, and then they throw their coils. Once a loop is anchored, the snake takes up the slack every time the victim breathes out, progressively restricting both circulation and breathing with each cycle. A large retic can generate enough pressure to cut off blood flow and air in a matter of minutes, and an animal being supported awkwardly by an unfamiliar handler will start searching for secure purchase, gripping down on whatever is closest to steady itself. Against everything Naquin had told her, Delphine lifted the snake's front section and draped it across the back of her shoulders, settling the head and neck of the animal along her own neck for the photo. Being lifted and balanced by someone who did not know how to support it, the python grew unstable almost at once and began seeking a stable anchor point. It anchored its tail against her hip and started to coil, searching for stability the way a constrictor does when it feels like it is falling. The first loop closed across her upper chest and the base of her neck. Delphine grabbed the thick middle of the snake and tried to pull it away from her body, which is the instinctive move and the worst possible one, because hauling on the middle does nothing while the tail stays anchored, and the effort just gives the snake something to tighten against. The coil drew snug. She tried to call out, but a constricted chest cannot push enough air to make a real sound, and what came out was thin and quiet under the noise of the party inside. Each time she exhaled, the python took up the slack, and within a minute or two, she could not draw a full breath back in. The panic made her heart race, which only burned through her remaining oxygen faster, the worst possible thing her body could do in that moment. She went to her knees in the grass, still pulling at the middle of the animal, and the second coil settled over the first, this one crossing higher, just under her jaw. The snake was not predatory. It was doing the only thing its body knows how to do when it feels unstable, which is hold tighter, and her struggling registered to it as exactly the kind of movement it needed to clamp down on. She likely lost consciousness within several minutes, and the snake maintained its coils until help arrived. By the time Naquin turned back with his phone, she was on the ground and no longer moving, the snake still wrapped around her, its head tucked off to the side. Naquin dropped everything and got both hands on the animal, shouting for help, and another guest ran out. The two of them knew the right move: find the tail and unpin it first, then unwind from that end. But a frightened 16-foot python locked down is a genuinely enormous amount of muscle, and it took them a long, frantic stretch to even locate the tail and start peeling the coils off her one at a time. Emergency services were called and reached the property as fast as the rural roads allowed, but Delphine was unresponsive by the time the snake was clear. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The parish coroner attributed the death to mechanical compression causing respiratory and circulatory failure. The investigation turned up no malice and no neglect of the animal, a legally permitted snake and an owner who had warned her clearly, and it was ruled an accidental death caused by unsafe handling. Louisiana was a constrictor, an animal with no venom at all that kills with nothing but pressure and patience. The the slowest and most physical death in this whole episode. The next one kills with pure chemistry instead, and the man who found it went out looking for it on purpose, with a camera in his hand and not much of a clue in his head. It was July 9, 2020, and the wet season had the plantations near Krabi in southern Thailand lush, green, and crawling with life. A young foreign traveler had been working his way through Southeast Asia for 3 months, and he was not just sightseeing, he was building something he hoped would take off. Dylan Easterbrook was a 26-year-old backpacker from England who was trying to grow a snake handling channel online. The problem was that he had a whole lot more camera footage than he had actual training, and that is a genuinely dangerous ratio to be running when your subject can kill you in an afternoon. He had filmed himself near venomous snakes a handful of times already and walked away fine every single time, which had quietly convinced him he knew what he was doing. When the owner of his guest house mentioned a big snake living out in a nearby plantation, Dylan did not think twice. He grabbed his camera and went off looking for it like it was a tourist attraction with opening hours instead of one of the most dangerous animals in the country. He had no snake hook, no handling stick, no plan for what to do if he got bitten, and no idea where the nearest facility equipped to treat a king cobra bite even was. He found what he was after coiled at the base of the plantation rose, a king cobra well over 10 feet long. He set his camera on a low wall, started talking to it the way he did in all his videos, and began closing the distance for the dramatic shot he had pictured in his head the whole way out there. The entire time he was narrating to the lens, like the snake was a prop that had agreed to be filmed, instead of a wild animal that had agreed to absolutely nothing. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes in the world, capable of rearing up a third of their body length, which on a big one means lifting their head several feet off the ground to look a standing person in the eye. Their venom is a powerful neurotoxin, and they deliver it in huge volumes, enough to take down prey as large as other snakes, and in a human it can shut the body down within hours by paralyzing the muscles used to breathe. A king cobra that feels cornered will give a clear warning first, rearing and hooding and hissing, but once it decides the threat is not leaving, it commits completely. Dylan got close, and the cobra did exactly what king cobras do. It rose up, spread its hood, and held there, giving him one of the clearest warning displays in the animal kingdom. He read it as the climax of his video and leaned in for the shot, pushing the camera toward its face. The snake struck. It came down off that reared posture with all of its weight behind the strike and hit him high on the forearm, and as he jerked backward in shock, it recovered instantly and struck a second time, catching the back of his hand. With a king cobra, 2 solid bites means a massive dose. The bites themselves were not especially painful, more like hard pinches, and for a while he probably thought he had gotten away with it. Then, over the next 20 to 30 minutes, the first signs of neurotoxic envenomation crept in, a tingling that spread up his arm, a thickness in his tongue, his eyelids starting to feel heavy and droop. He stumbled back toward the guest house trying to tell people what had happened, and his words were already coming out slurred and slow. The guest house owner bundled him into a vehicle and started the long drive toward the nearest hospital. As the minutes stretched on, the paralysis worked steadily deeper, his breathing turning shallow and labored as the muscles in his chest began to fail, the neurotoxin shutting his respiratory system down piece by piece. King cobra venom does not need long when the dose is this big, and the distance was simply working against him the whole way. Dylan lost consciousness during the drive as his breathing failed and he could not be revived. He was confirmed dead a short time after they reached help, with forensic examination attributing the death to neurotoxic envenomation. The footage recovered from his own camera showed clearly that he had approached and crowded the snake despite its open, sustained warning, and local authorities recorded it as a death caused by deliberately provoking a wild cobra. The channel he had been working so hard to build ended up with one last video that nobody who cared about him ever wanted to watch. The snake told him to leave in the only language it has, and he filmed the warning instead of taking it. Thailand was a man who went out hunting for the snake on purpose. South Africa was the exact opposite, a snake that turned up completely uninvited in a man's own shed, and a man who decided the fix for that was a garden tool and his own 2 hands. It was November 22nd, 2014, and the summer heat was building across a small holding in the Limpopo region of South Africa. Out here the bush comes right up to the fences, and finding wildlife on your property is just part of life, but some of that wildlife is a lot less forgiving than the rest. Schalk Oosthuizen was a 53-year-old small-holding farmer who had lived on the land his entire life. He had come across plenty of snakes over the years and killed more than a few of them, and that long track record had handed him a confidence that was about to work directly against him. He knew, like everyone in the area knew, that there was a free volunteer snake catcher a single phone call away who would show up within the hour and bag the animal for nothing. That afternoon, he found a black mamba in his feed shed, a long one, tucked along the back wall behind some sacks. Instead of making the call everybody tells you to make, he grabbed a garden fork and decided he would just handle it himself like he always had. His wife called to him from the house to leave it alone and wait for the catcher. He went in after it anyway. The shed had one door, the snake was at the back, and by walking in with the fork, he had put himself between the mamba and the only way out. There was a trained guy one phone call away who would have bagged that mamba in 10 10 minutes for free, and he reached for a garden fork instead. I will genuinely never understand picking the fork over the phone. Black mambas are among the fastest snakes on the planet and can rear a third of their body off the ground, which on a 9-foot snake puts the head at chest height on a grown man. They have a reputation for aggression that is mostly unfair, since a mamba given a clear exit will usually just leave. But a mamba that is cornered with no escape is a completely different animal, and it will defend itself with a blur of fast, repeated strikes. The venom is a potent mix that attacks the nervous system and the heart, and an untreated bite from a big one can become fatal within a few hours, and sometimes much sooner. Schalk jabbed at it with the fork and missed, the tines clipping the wall and the sacks, and the mamba came off the back of the shed faster than he could pull the tool back for another try. A black mamba over a defensive distance is one of the fastest strikes in the natural world, and he simply did not have the reaction time. It struck him twice before he could even get a step backward, once high on the inner thigh and once on the hand wrapped around the fork. Then it poured past his legs, out the open door, and vanished into the grass, gone in under 2 seconds. For a moment, he thought the strikes might have been dry since the bites barely hurt. Just 2 quick scratches that did not even bleed much. But within 10 to 20 minutes, the early signs of envenomation arrived, a strange tingling spreading from the bites, a wave of anxiety he could not explain, his eyelids starting to feel heavy and his mouth going clumsy when he tried to speak. He walked out of that shed on his own power and made it most of the way to the house before his legs simply stopped cooperating and folded under him. A mamba does not give its victims much of a window, and his was closing fast. His wife got him to the ground in the shade and called the neighbor and then the emergency line, but the nearest ambulance was coming from a town a long way off. The neurotoxins moved through him steadily, his breathing growing labored, his body going slack. The volunteer snake catcher, the same one who could have handled the whole thing for free, arrived before the ambulance did, but by then there was nothing to be done. Schalk was unresponsive when the paramedics reached him and was pronounced dead at the scene, a post-mortem examination attributing it to rapid neurotoxic envenomation. The mamba was later found and removed alive, and the case was logged as a preventable death. The catcher reportedly said the snake would have left on its own if the shed door had just been propped open and everyone had walked away. South Africa was a snake somebody walked in and chose to fight. India flips that completely. A snake nobody saw at all, sitting in the exact spot a coworker had warned him about that morning. It was August 21st, 2016, and the monsoon had a rice mill in rural Maharashtra running hot and humid around the clock. The rains bring the rats into the stored grain, and where the rats go, certain snakes follow, which makes a working grain mill one of the more quietly dangerous places to put your hands without looking. Pravin Kulkarni was a 38-year-old mill worker who had spent years around the husk piles and grain stores. The work was fast, and the pay was tied to keeping the lines moving, so nobody on that floor wasted a second on anything that slowed them down, gloves very much included. A coworker had told him just that morning that something had been rustling around inside one of the husk piles, and to watch himself clearing it. Late in the shift, a jam stopped one of the lines, and the blockage was down in the husk, right around where the coworker had been pointing earlier. Rather than grab a tool or call someone over, Pravin just reached straight in with his bare hand to clear it, because that was faster, and it had always worked fine before. What he could not see down in the warm, dim husk was the Russell's viper coiled in it, pulled in by the same rats everyone was trying to keep out of the grain. His hand went in right next to it. He pushed a bare hand into a pile a coworker had literally just warned him was moving. A tool, a little caution, and 1 extra minute were the entire difference, and he spent none of it. Russell's vipers are one of the so-called Big Four snakes, responsible for an enormous share of the world's snakebite deaths, and they sit on lists of the deadliest snakes alive for good reason. They are thick, fast-striking ambush snakes that tend to hold their ground rather than flee, and when threatened, they coil tight and let out a hiss you can hear across a room. Their venom is hemotoxic, which means it goes after the blood and tissue, destroying the body's ability to clot, breaking down flesh around the bite, and over hours to days attacking the kidneys, which is what most often ends up killing the victim. The viper struck his hand the instant it touched down, a deep, hard hit that drove its long fangs in, and Pravin yanked his hand back with 2 dark puncture wounds welling up immediately, the coworker who had warned him already running at the shout. The pain came on fast and sharp, a deep burning that climbed his arm, and noticeable swelling developed rapidly and kept worsening over the next several hours as the venom went to work breaking down the tissue. The other workers supported his arm and got him moving toward help, but this is the kind of bite where the worst of the damage happens slow and deep in places you cannot see. Blood started seeping from the punctures and from his gums and would not clot, a textbook sign of serious hemotoxic envenomation, and his arm was darkening and stiffening by the time they got him off the mill floor. They carried him first to a small local clinic which did not have anywhere near enough anti-venom on hand for a bite this bad, and the delay while they arranged a transfer to a larger hospital ate up hours he did not have to spare. By the time he reached real care, the venom had spread through his system, his blood no longer clotting, and his kidneys beginning to shut down. Pravin held on for a couple of days in the hospital before his kidneys failed completely, and he died of complications from the envenomation. The treating doctors recorded reported the cause plainly, and the death became part of the country's enormous annual snakebite burden. The mill was later cited for failing to provide basic protective equipment, and investigators noted that proper tools and safe clearing could have prevented the bite altogether. India's viper was an animal hiding in plain sight, in a spot nobody could see into. Australia's brown snake was the reverse, right out in the open in broad daylight, and the man who died had a phone in his pocket and a much smarter option, one quick call away the entire time. It was October 3rd, 2018, and spring had arrived in the outer suburbs of Brisbane, Australia, which is another way of saying snake season had arrived too. As the weather warms, the snakes get moving, and one of the most dangerous snakes on the continent turns up in gardens and garages like clockwork every single year. Kieran Maddock was a 44-year-old homeowner with a stubborn streak and a low opinion of paying for things he figured he could handle himself. In Australia, there are licensed snake catchers basically everywhere. They come out fast and barely charge anything, and calling one is genuinely the entire solution to a snake in your yard. His wife had the number pulled up on her phone and was already telling him to use it. He had spotted an eastern brown snake moving through the garden near the back patio, long and pale and unmistakable. Kieran was not about to pay a stranger to deal with a snake in his own backyard, so he pulled a shovel off the shed wall and marched out to kill it himself. His wife called after him from the doorway to just leave it alone and let the professional handle it. He cornered the brown against the patio edge and raised the shovel. Nearly every snakebite death in Australia comes from somebody trying to kill or move the snake, not from a snake just turning up. He walked outside and made himself that exact statistic over a shovel and a few bucks he did not feel like spending. Eastern brown snakes are responsible for more snakebite deaths in Australia than any other species, and they manage that despite their venom being needed only in tiny amounts to be lethal. They are fast, alert, and when they feel threatened, they can rear up into an S shape and deliver several bites in a single defensive flurry. The venom works on the blood and the nervous system, and a serious bite can drop blood pressure and trigger cardiac arrest with frightening speed, sometimes before the victim even feels properly unwell. Kieran swung the shovel and missed, the blade clanging off the pavers, and the brown was on him before he could lift it for a second try. It reared into a low S shape and struck his ankle, and as he stumbled back, it tracked the movement and caught him again on the calf. Then it was gone, racing off across the yard while he stood there having barely felt the two bites land. That was the trap of it. The bites stung less than the shovel handle had jarred his hands. Two faint scratches with hardly any blood, and for a stretch he genuinely thought he was fine, even a little annoyed that the snake had gotten away clean. He walked back toward the house to tell his wife it had taken off, and that short walk across the yard was about the moment the venom started to land. A wave of dizziness rolled over him, then a heavy weakness pulling at his arms and legs, his vision starting to smear at the edges. His wife took one look at him and called emergency services. She got him sitting down, and over the next stretch of time he steadily got worse, the dizziness sliding into confusion and a deepening weakness, and then, as the venom wrecked his ability to clot, his gums and the bite sites began to ooze. The property sat out on the semi-rural fringe of the suburbs, and the ambulance had a long run to reach them. By the time the paramedics arrived, the severe coagulopathy and cardiovascular collapse had progressed too far, and his heart gave out before they could stabilize him. Kieran was pronounced dead, with forensic examination attributing the death to envenomation from an eastern brown snake. Authorities recorded that the bite had occurred while he was attempting to kill the animal, the precise scenario behind a substantial proportion of the country's snakebite deaths year after year. A licensed catcher later said the snake had only been passing through the yard and would almost certainly have moved on by nightfall if everyone had just gone back inside and left it alone. Australia was a death that came on fast and loud in a suburban backyard. The next one is the quietest killer in this entire episode, a snake whose bite is so gentle that people roll over and go back to sleep without ever knowing it happened. It was June 5th, 2013, and the monsoon was settling over a rural construction site in central India, driving everything that lived in the fields toward dry ground and shelter. The workers slept on site in open-sided shelters, and during the rains that meant sharing the space with whatever came in out of the wet. Mahesh Borkar was a 29-year-old migrant laborer, new to this particular site, and bunked in with a crew of older, more experienced workers. Those older guys had a habit he thought was a bit much. They slept up on raised cots through the monsoon instead of down on the floor, and they kept telling him night after night to do the same. He had been sleeping on a thin mat on the ground for weeks without any trouble, and he had quietly filed the cot thing away as old-timer superstition. To him, the cots were a hassle to set up after a long day of hauling materials, and skipping one saved a few minutes he would rather spend asleep, the kind of small trade-off that never matters until the night it does. The warnings were specifically about crates. The older workers had seen what these snakes do during the rains, how they slip into shelters at night looking for the same dry warmth the men were after, and how they move along the floor where people are sleeping. Mahesh kept to his mat on the ground. That night, sometime in the small hours, a common crate moved through the shelter. The older guys begged him to sleep up on a cot, and he figured they were being dramatic. The crate crate is the stuff of nightmares to me because you do not even have to do anything wrong, you just have to be lying on the floor. The common crate is another of India's big four, and it kills in a way that is genuinely unsettling. It is nocturnal and most active in the dark. It hunts close to the ground, and its bite is famously almost painless, often described as feeling like nothing more than an ant bite or a faint prick. Its venom is a powerful neurotoxin, but the effects are delayed, so the victim frequently does not realize anything serious has happened. Huge numbers of crate deaths happen to people bitten in their sleep who never wake up enough to understand what is wrong until the paralysis is already setting in. The crate found Mahesh on his mat and bit him, likely on a hand, a foot, or a lower leg left outside the thin blanket. He half woke at a faint sting, the kind of thing anyone would brush off as a mosquito or an ant in the night, shifted a little to get comfortable, and went back to sleep. The snake moved on through the shelter and out into the dark. There was no pain to keep him awake, no swelling rising on his skin to alarm him, almost nothing at all to see, which is exactly how the crate does most of its killing. Hours passed. The venom worked silently the entire time, creeping through his nervous system while he slept, and he woke a little before dawn, not from pain, but from a deep, strange ache low in his belly and a heaviness in his limbs he could not place. He tried to sit up and tell the others that something felt wrong, but his words were already coming out slurred, and his eyelids were sliding shut on their own, no matter how hard he fought them. When the older workers got a lamp on him, they saw the signs they had spent weeks warning him about: the drooping, slack face, the shallow, labored breathing, and when they searched his skin, they could barely even find the bite, just a faint pair of pinpricks. They got him up and carried him toward the nearest clinic at first light, but the crate's painless bite had already done the cruelest part of its work by stealing the hours when treatment would have helped most. He was in serious respiratory distress by the time they arrived. The clinic did what it could and arranged a transfer to a larger hospital, but Mahesh died of respiratory failure from the envenomation before the day was out. A post-mortem examination identified the cause, and the death was recorded among the season's many crate fatalities, the bulk of which happened exactly like this, to people bitten in their sleep. The site brought in raised sleeping platforms not long after, the exact thing the older workers had been asking for the whole time, and the kind of fix that only ever seems to arrive the day after it would have mattered. India's crate killed a man for the simple crime of lying down to sleep on the wrong patch of floor. The last story brings the whole thing back around to where we started, a person who walked right up to a snake completely on purpose, except this time with a crowd watching, a dare in the air, and a few too many drinks in him. It was October 21st, 2013, and a small rural community in southern Georgia was holding the kind of local fall gathering where somebody always ends up bringing the snakes. There was food, there was a lot of beer, and off to one side a handler was running an informal rattlesnake display, the sort of thing that pulls a crowd in close and quietly hands people some very bad ideas. The handler had been working the snakes all afternoon, demonstrating them and talking the crowd through their biology. Dustin Sturgill was a 34-year-old local who had come out for the afternoon and had been working through beers for a good while by the time he wandered over to the snake display. He had zero handling experience, but he had spent the last hour watching the handler pick the snakes up like they were garden hoses, and that made the whole thing look a lot easier and safer than it actually is. Somebody in the crowd dared him to get a photo holding one of the big rattlers. That was all it took. A few beers, a crowd egging him on, and a guy who figured if the snake show guy could do it, then how hard could it really be? He stepped up to a thick eastern diamondback that had been picked up, handled, and stressed out by the display all day long, reached down and grabbed it wrong, too close to the middle of the body instead of controlling the head. The crowd got their phones up. A few beers, a crowd daring him on, and one of the most dangerous snakes in North America already in a foul mood from a whole day of being handled. I genuinely cannot picture a worse set of conditions to go grab a rattlesnake under. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America. Big ones pushing past 6 feet with fangs that can be over an inch long and a strike range of around 2/3 of their body length. They are one of the most dangerous snakes on the continent, less for raw venom potency than for their sheer size, their huge venom yield, and those long fangs, and a full bite from a large one delivers a massive dose. They are not aggressive by nature, but a big rattler that has been handled and stressed repeatedly is wound up and primed to defend itself the first chance it gets. The second, Dustin's hand closed too far down the body. The diamondback twisted back on itself with that surprising speed big rattlers have and drove a full bite into his hand, fangs sinking deep and pumping a heavy dose of venom before it released and dropped back to the ground. The handler was already lunging in to pin it. The pain was instant and enormous, nothing like the gentle, barely felt bites earlier in this episode. A deep burning agony that had him screaming almost immediately, and the swelling began rapidly, his hand visibly enlarging within minutes as the hemotoxic venom flooded the tissue. The crowd went from laughing and filming to screaming in about 2 seconds flat, and a couple of guys half carried him toward a truck while somebody fumbled with a phone to call for help. The bite site was bleeding freely, and the swelling was already climbing past his wrist toward his elbow, the skin going tight and discolored. A serious diamondback bite is a medical emergency, measured in how fast you can get antivenom into someone, and out here that meant a wait. The gathering was well out in the country, and an airlift to a larger hospital was held up while they sorted a landing spot in the dark, so a lot of time passed before he reached the care he needed. By then, the envenomation was severe and widespread, his blood pressure crashing. He was given antivenom once he arrived, but the dose was massive, and the delay had let it get ahead of treatment. Dustin held on for a while at the hospital, but died of complications from the envenomation. The medical examiner attributed the death to the rattlesnake bite, and authorities noted that alcohol and unsupervised handling had both played central roles in what happened. The organizers did not feature snakes at the gathering again the following year. The handler, who had worked those snakes safely all day, reportedly said the one thing he could not do was stop a grown man who had decided he was going to grab one. Looking back at all 7, nearly every one of these people had an easy out sitting right there, a phone call, a glove, a cot, a bit of plain common sense, and they walked straight past it. So tell me down below which one got under your skin the most, and I'll catch you in the next one.